My life was a structure of straight lines and right angles, a carefully curated gallery of solitude. Each day was a replica of the last, a comforting and quiet pattern. I would wake at 6:30, the alarm a gentle chime that did not jar the silence of my apartment. Coffee was brewed via a pour-over method that required patience and precision, two virtues I held in high regard. My work as a graphic designer was done from a minimalist desk facing a window that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. My world was grayscale, muted tones, clean vectors. It was safe. It was controlled. It was profoundly, achingly lonely. And into this ordered quiet, he existed. Julian. He was the lead architect at the firm whose offices occupied the 2 floors below mine. He was not a part of my grayscale world. He was a disruption of warm, saturated color I could only observe from a distance. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed built to carry more than just the weight of his own ambition. His presence filled a room not with noise, but with a kind of gravitational pull, a quiet solidity that made everything around him seem more real. My carefully constructed world felt like a flimsy sketch next to his finished, three-dimensional form. I never spoke to him, not really. We shared the occasional elevator ride, the air thick with the scent of his cologne, something clean and warm, like sandalwood and cut cedar, and the unspoken tension of my own ridiculous, silent admiration. He would offer a low, polite murmur of a greeting, and I would manage a nod, my throat tight, my heart hammering a frantic, disorderly rhythm against my ribs. His voice was a low rumble, the kind of sound that seemed to vibrate in your bones, a steady and calming bass note in the chaotic symphony of the city. The barrier between us was not just my own crippling introversion, it was a chasm of professionalism. His firm, Sterling & Vance, was our biggest client. My designs gave visual life to his architectural blueprints. We were connected by threads of kerning and color palettes, but we were worlds apart. To me, he was a living blueprint of everything I was not: confident, grounded, effortlessly social. I saw him once through the window of a coffee shop, laughing with a woman, his head tilted back, his smile genuine and unguarded. The sight cemented my assumption, another brick in the high, impenetrable wall I had built around my feelings. He existed in a different world, one with bright laughter and easy touches, a world I was not invited to. So I made him into a work of art, a sculpture to be appreciated from behind a velvet rope. I cataloged his details the way a curator would an artifact, the way his dark hair curled just slightly at his temples when the humidity was high, the focused intensity in his eyes, a shade of deep forest green, when he studied a set of plans in the lobby, the way he would rub the back of his neck when he was tired, a gesture of unconscious vulnerability that made my chest ache. He was a museum piece, beautiful and unattainable. I was the silent observer, the lonely patron who visited every day, content to simply look, to yearn from a safe and silent distance, never daring to imagine the feel of the marble beneath my fingertips. My admiration was a secret, a quiet, orderly file in the vast, catalogued archive of my solitude. It was enough, I told myself. It had to be. The disruption came, as disruptions often do, in the form of an email. A mandatory, all-hands-on-deck design conference in Chicago. In February, my boss, a woman who communicated primarily in exclamation points, declared it a vital networking opportunity. For me, it was a sentence of 3 days of forced pleasantries and over-caffeinated anxiety. The only small, secret flicker of light in this verdict was another line in the email. Sterling & Vance would be there, presenting the keynote on sustainable urban development. Julian would be there. The thought sent a tremor of both terror and a deeply buried, shameful excitement through my carefully ordered world. The day of the flight, the sky was the color of a fresh bruise, heavy and ominous. The weather reports had been escalating all morning, the word blizzard shifting from a possibility to a certainty. My flight was delayed, then delayed again. The airport terminal became a purgatory of frustrated sighs and crying children. I found a quiet corner, my headphones a shield against the rising chaos, and tried to lose myself in the grid lines of a new project on my laptop. Leo Wright. The voice cut through the noise-canceling hum of my headphones. It was that low, resonant sound, the one that vibrated straight to my core. I looked up, and my breath hitched. It was Julian. He stood there, his overcoat dusted with snowflakes, looking just as solid and calm in the swirling chaos of the terminal as he did in the quiet lobby of our building. Yes, I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. I pulled off my headphones, feeling exposed. I thought that was you, he said, a small, weary smile on his face. My flight was just canceled. Looks like we're all grounded for a while. He gestured vaguely at the departures board, which was now a sea of red cancellations. My own flight icon flickered from delayed to canceled as he spoke. A wave of dread washed over me, cold and immediate. The carefully planned structure of my trip was collapsing. Mine too, I said, the words feeling inadequate. We stood in a strange, shared silence for a moment, two colleagues stranded in a sea of strangers. The order of my life had been predicated on avoiding exactly this kind of unstructured, unpredictable interaction with him. Now, there was no escape. The storm had trapped us together. Well, Julian said, breaking the silence as he ran a hand through his damp hair. The conference hotel is probably our best bet. They might have shuttles, but I'm guessing a cab is the only thing that will get through this. Want to share one? No sense in both of us fighting for one in this mess. It was a simple, logical offer. But to me, it felt like a seismic shift. The velvet rope in my internal museum had just been unhooked. He was inviting me into his space, into a shared, confined metal box that would travel through a snow-strangled city. My anxiety screamed no, a frantic, panicked alarm. It was too much, too close, too real. But my yearning, that quiet, persistent ache, whispered a single, treacherous word. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Yeah, okay. The cab ride was a surreal dream. The world outside the windows was a frantic, white blur, the snow coming down in thick, hypnotic sheets. Inside, the space felt impossibly small, charged with a proximity I had only ever fantasized about. I was hyper-aware of everything. The way Julian's thigh was a mere inch from my own, the warmth from his body seeping through the thick fabric of his trousers. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and cedar, was now mingling with the cold, clean smell of snow and the faint, artificial cherry of the driver's air freshener. I kept my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my gaze fixed on the swirling snow, trying to regulate my breathing. Julian seemed unaffected, making polite small talk with the driver about the storm. His calm was a stark contrast to my internal chaos. The walls of my carefully constructed world were shaking, and I felt a dizzying mix of terror and exhilaration. He was no longer a distant sculpture. He was a living, breathing man sitting next to me, his presence a warm, solid weight in the cold, chaotic night. When we finally pulled up to the conference hotel, the lobby was a scene of utter pandemonium. A massive crowd was gathered around the front desk, a chorus of frustrated voices rising above the din. A harried-looking woman with a headset was trying to placate a furious man in a business suit. The air was thick with the smell of wet wool and desperation. We waited in line for nearly an hour, moving at a glacial pace. The heat of the overcrowded lobby was stifling. By the time we reached the front desk, I was already certain of the outcome. The clerk, a young man whose eyes were wide with exhaustion, looked at us with an expression of profound pity. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice strained. "The blizzard. Everyone's stranded. We've been overbooked for hours. We have nothing. The entire city is booked solid." A cold, heavy certainty settled in my stomach. Of course, this was the logical, disastrous conclusion. We were stranded, not just at the airport, but in the city itself. Julian, however, did not look defeated. He just gave the clerk a calm, reassuring nod. "I understand. You're doing your best. Is there anywhere you can think of? A smaller place, a boutique hotel, anything off the beaten path?" The clerk's eyes lit up with a flicker of memory. He typed furiously into his computer. "There's one place. The Stellan. It's a small, independent hotel a few blocks from here. They just had a last-minute cancellation. It's the only room I can find in a 10-mile radius." He paused, looking from Julian to me, a hint of apprehension on his face. "It's the single room. One king bed." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and loaded. One room, one bed. The carefully maintained distance, the professional boundary, the velvet rope. It was all about to be obliterated by a snowstorm and a single hotel reservation. My mind went completely blank. The hum of the chaotic lobby faded into a dull roar in my ears. This was a scenario so far beyond the realm of what my ordered life could handle that my brain simply refused to process it. Julian was quiet for a long moment. I could feel his gaze on me, but I couldn't bring myself to meet it. I was staring at a scuff mark on the marble floor, tracing its imperfect shape with my eyes, trying to find some semblance of order in this spiraling chaos. Then he spoke, his voice still that impossibly calm, low rumble. "We'll take it." The hotel room was small, but elegant. Tasteful, minimalist decor in shades of charcoal and cream. A single large window looking out at the swirling white abyss of the storm. But all I could see, all my brain could focus on, was the bed. It dominated the room, a vast, white landscape of crisp sheets and plush pillows. A king-sized bed. One bed. It felt like an accusation. An awkward, heavy silence descended as soon as the bellhop left. We stood on opposite sides of the room, our luggage forming a sort of no-man's land between us. The carefully curated distance I had always maintained was gone, replaced by a forced, suffocating intimacy that made my skin prickle with a nervous energy. I felt like a raw nerve, every sense heightened to an almost painful degree. "Well," Julian said, breaking the silence as he slipped off his overcoat. "This is not ideal." He gave a small, wry smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I could see a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. He was not as unaffected by this as I had thought. "I can sleep on the floor," I blurted out, the words tumbling out of me in a rush. "Or in that chair. I don't mind." Really, the armchair in the corner looked stiff and unwelcoming, but it felt infinitely safer than the alternative. Julian looked from the chair to me, his brow furrowed. "Don't be ridiculous, Leo. It's a huge bed. We're both adults. We can share a bed for one night without it being a big deal. I'll take the couch if you're that uncomfortable, but it seems absurd." His logic was infuriatingly sound. It was absurd, but my reaction was not based in logic. It was a primal, panicked response to the complete demolition of my carefully constructed reality. The man I had secretly admired from afar for over a year was suggesting we sleep in the same bed. It was a fantasy so potent and so forbidden that I had never even allowed myself to fully form it in my mind. Now it was a practical solution to a logistical problem. "No, it's fine," I stammered, feeling my face flush with heat. "The bed is fine." The room seemed to shrink as we navigated the simple tasks of settling in. Every movement was a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance. We gave each other a wide berth, our bodies moving in arcs to avoid accidental contact. The air was thick with unspoken things, charged with a tension that was almost electric. I became acutely aware of the soundscape of our shared space. The soft whisper of his cashmere sweater as he pulled it over his head. The quiet clink of his watch on the bedside table. The rush of water as he used the sink in the bathroom. And beneath it all, the frantic, betraying thrum of my own pulse in my ears. The room was filled with his scent. Not just the faint, lingering notes of his cologne, but something more fundamental. The clean, warm smell of his skin, the faint scent of the soap from the hotel bathroom. It was intoxicating and terrifying, an invasion of my senses that left me feeling dizzy and unmoored. He was everywhere. There was no escape from his presence. "I'm going to take a quick shower, if that's okay," he said from the bathroom doorway, his hair slightly damp from washing his face. "Of course," I said, my eyes fixed on my laptop screen, pretending to be engrossed in an email I had already read 3 times. The sound of the shower was a low, steady rush of white noise, but it did little to calm my nerves. My mind was a maelstrom of anxious thoughts. What were the rules for this? Was there a protocol for sharing a bed with your unattainable crush who was also your firm's biggest client? I felt like I had been dropped into a play without a script, the stage lights blindingly bright, every line of dialogue a potential disaster. When he emerged from the bathroom, a cloud of steam followed him. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and a pair of dark sweatpants. His hair was dark and tousled, and droplets of water clung to his neck. The sight was so casually, devastatingly intimate that I had to look away, my cheeks burning. He was no longer the polished architect from the office. He was just a man, warm and clean from a shower, standing a few feet away from me in a hotel room. The museum piece had come to life, and I had no idea how to handle it. "Your turn," he said, his voice softer now, the rumble gentled by the quiet of the room. My own shower was a frantic, clumsy affair. I moved with jerky, inefficient motions, my mind racing. I was trying to wash away the anxiety, the suffocating awareness of him just on the other side of the door. But it was useless. The soap smelled like him. The towel smelled like him. When I emerged, dressed in my own worn t-shirt and pajama pants, the tension in the room was somehow even thicker. We didn't talk. We moved around the bed, a silent, awkward negotiation of space. He took the side closest to the window, and I took the one by the door. I slipped under the crisp, cool sheets, my body rigid, my muscles coiled tight. I lay on the very edge of the mattress, creating as much physical distance as possible, a buffer zone of empty space between us. He switched off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into a deep, velvety darkness. The only light came from the faint, diffuse glow of the city lights reflecting off the falling snow outside the window. In the darkness, my other senses went into overdrive. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing, a slow, steady rhythm that was a stark contrast to my own shallow, ragged breaths. I could feel the subtle shift of the mattress as he settled in, and I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a tangible presence in the cool air of the room. It was a magnetic pull, a warmth my cold, lonely body craved on a cellular level. For a long time, we lay there in silence, two strangers sharing a bed, a universe of unspoken feelings and anxieties separating us. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of the day, from the canceled flight to his calm declaration of, "We'll take it." I was so consumed by my own internal monologue, my own spiral of panic and yearning, that I had not truly considered his perspective. For me, this was a cataclysm. For him, it was probably just an awkward inconvenience, a logistical hurdle to be overcome. The minutes stretched into an hour. I knew he was not asleep. His breathing was too regular, too controlled. He was awake, lying in the darkness, just as I was. The silence between us grew heavier, filled with the weight of everything we were not saying. Then, in the stillness, he shifted. The mattress dipped as he turned to face my side of the bed. I remained perfectly still, my back to him, feigning sleep. But my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild, chaotic rhythm that I was sure he could hear in the quiet room. His voice, when it came, was a low murmur that seemed to be absorbed by the darkness, making it feel even more intimate. "You know," he began, his tone soft and contemplative, "I've been dreading this conference for weeks." The admission surprised me so much that I almost turned over. I remained still, my breathing carefully measured, but I was listening with every fiber of my being. "This keynote speech," he continued, a thread of weariness in his voice. "It's a huge deal for the firm. My father won an award at this same conference 20 years ago. Everyone expects me to, I don't know, live up to that." He let out a soft, humorless laugh. "The truth is, I'm terrified. I feel like an imposter half the time, just playing the part of the confident architect everyone thinks I am." His words were a revelation, a crack in the flawless marble of the sculpture I had created in my mind. The grounded, self-assured man I had watched from afar was admitting to fear, to insecurity. He was revealing a hidden vulnerability, a glimpse into the space behind the confident facade. In that moment, my feelings for him shifted, deepened. It was no longer just the shallow admiration of an art piece. It was something more complex, more real. It was empathy. It was a profound sense of connection to the human being lying a few feet away from me in the dark. The walls inside my own chest, the ones I had built around my heart, began to feel a little less solid. I still did not move, did not speak. I was afraid that any sound from me would shatter this fragile, unexpected moment of intimacy. I just listened to the sound of his breathing, to the quiet confession hanging in the space between us. He had offered a piece of his real, unpolished self, and I held it in the darkness, a precious, terrifying gift. The chaos of the day began to recede, replaced by a new kind of tension, not of anxiety, but of a quiet, trembling anticipation. The straight lines of my world had not just been disrupted, they had been completely erased, and I had no idea what new shape my life would take in the morning. The silence that followed his confession was different. It was no longer empty or awkward. It was full, humming with a quiet energy. I lay with my back to him, my body a rigid line of feigned sleep, but my mind was screaming. Say something. Turn over. Do something. But I was frozen, trapped by years of practiced self-preservation. My fear of doing the wrong thing was so powerful that it prevented me from doing anything at all. I must have drifted into a light, uneasy sleep because I was startled back to full awareness by the sound of his voice, closer this time, a low rumble right behind me. Leo, he whispered into the darkness. Are you awake? My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the warmth of his breath on the back of my neck. He had moved closer. The buffer zone I had so carefully established was gone. Every nerve in my body was on fire. I gave the smallest possible nod, a barely perceptible movement. Are you okay? He asked, his voice laced with a genuine concern that unraveled me. You've been so quiet. I'm sorry if this is. I'm sorry. This is a weird situation. I finally found my voice, though it came out as a shaky, tight whisper. It's okay. It was not okay. I was so far from okay, I could no longer remember what okay felt like. My heart was a wild bird trapped in my chest, beating its wings against my ribs. I felt another shift in the mattress, and then a touch. It was tentative, questioning. The back of his fingers, warm and calloused, brushed against my hand where it rested on the sheet between us. It was the barest, most fleeting contact, but it sent a jolt of pure electricity through my entire body. It was like a lightning strike in the dark, illuminating everything. The air crackled. The world stopped. My first instinct was to pull away, to retreat back into the safety of my shell. But I didn't. I couldn't. My body, for once, defied the frantic commands of my anxious mind. I stayed perfectly still, my hand resting on the sheet, an unspoken invitation. His fingers slowly, hesitantly, intertwined with mine. His hand was large and warm, engulfing my own. The simple, profound intimacy of it was overwhelming. It was more real, more potent, than any fantasy I had ever dared to construct. It was a silent conversation in the dark, a question and an answer all at once. Slowly, I turned over to face him. In the dim, snowy light filtering through the window, I could just make out the shape of his face, his eyes dark pools of uncertainty. He was so close. I could feel the warmth of his body, smell the clean scent of his skin. The space between our faces was charged, a humming, vibrant void. He did not say anything. He just looked at me, his gaze searching mine. And in his eyes, I saw not the confident, unattainable client, but the man who was afraid of failing his father, the man who was just as uncertain in this moment as I was. He lifted his other hand, his movements slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. He gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking softly against my skin. The touch was exquisitely tender, a quiet reassurance that shattered the last of my defenses. My carefully constructed walls, the fortress of solitude I had lived in for so long, crumbled into dust. He leaned in, and the world narrowed to the few inches between our lips. The first touch was impossibly soft, a hesitant, questioning pressure. It was not a kiss of passion, but one of discovery. It tasted of mint and unspoken yearning, of the quiet intimacy of the darkened room. It was a question asked in a language my body understood far better than my mind. My mind, in fact, had short-circuited. It was a riot of disbelief and sensation. This was not happening. This could not be happening. Julian was kissing me. The world tilted on its axis, the straight lines and right angles of my life dissolving into a beautiful, terrifying chaos. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated feeling, a mix of soaring ecstasy and profound terror. My ordered life was over. It had ended with this one, impossibly gentle touch. I kissed him back. My hand, the one not still entwined with his, came up to rest on his chest. I could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath my palm, a rhythm that was somehow both calming and exhilarating. The kiss deepened, still slow, still tender, but with a new certainty. It was an acknowledgement, a confirmation of this impossible, wonderful thing that was happening between us. It was everything I had ever wanted, a silent dream made real in a snowbound hotel room in a city far from home. It was the end of one life, and the terrifying, beautiful beginning of another. Waking up was a slow, disorienting process. For a blissful, fleeting moment, I was aware only of an unfamiliar warmth wrapped around me, a solid weight at my back, and a slow, steady heartbeat against my shoulder blades. It was a feeling of profound safety, of being anchored. Then, memory flooded back in a cold, brutal rush. The hotel, the storm, Julian, the kiss. My eyes snapped open. The room was bathed in the cold, gray light of a snow-bright morning. I was on my side, and Julian was spooned behind me, his arm draped possessively over my waist, his breathing a warm, steady puff against the back of my neck. We had fallen asleep like this, tangled together after a series of soft, searching kisses in the dark. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the warm fog of sleep. This was too much. This was real. The darkness of the previous night had provided a cloak of anonymity, a dreamlike quality to what had happened. But the harsh morning light was an unforgiving interrogator. It exposed everything. The intimacy of our position, the reality of the man in the bed with me. The man who was my firm's biggest client. The man I had assumed was straight. The man who was probably, at this very moment, regretting every single second of his lapse in judgment. My anxiety, a familiar and unwelcome companion, began its insidious work. It whispered venomous certainties into my ear. It was a mistake, a fluke, a moment of shared loneliness and stress, amplified by the storm and the close quarters. He didn't mean it. He was probably just experimenting, or confused. And now, in the cold light of day, he would be horrified. He would pull away, put up his professional walls, and pretend it never happened. I had not just made a fool of myself. I had potentially destroyed a crucial business relationship and made my work life an unbearable landscape of awkwardness. Carefully, slowly, I began to extricate myself from his hold. I lifted his arm, his muscles lax in sleep, and slid out from under it. The loss of his warmth was immediate and acute, a sudden, chilling coldness against my back. I moved to the very edge of the bed, my heart pounding a frantic, guilty rhythm. I sat up, my back to him, and stared out the window. The snow had stopped, leaving the city draped in a thick, pristine blanket of white. The world outside was quiet, muffled, and still. It was a stark contrast to the screaming chaos in my head. I heard him stir behind me. A soft murmur, the sound of a man waking up. I held my breath, my entire body tensing. I did not turn around. I could not bear to see the look of regret on his face. Leo. His voice was thick with sleep, a low, gravelly sound. I still did not turn. Morning, I said, my voice coming out clipped and unnatural. I kept my gaze fixed on the snow-covered rooftops outside. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel him sitting up. I could feel his eyes on my back. The distance between us on the bed, only a few feet of mattress, felt like a vast, unbridgeable chasm. The easy intimacy of the night had evaporated, replaced by a thick, unbearable awkwardness. He cleared his throat. I'll use the shower first, if you want. I have to make a few calls. His tone was polite, professional, distant. It was exactly what my anxiety had predicted. It was confirmation of my worst fears. The shift was so abrupt it gave me whiplash. The tender, vulnerable man from last night was gone, replaced by Julian Vance, the confident architect from Sterling and Vance. The wall was back up, higher and thicker than ever before. Okay, I said, my voice small. I listened to him move around the room, the sounds of his morning routine now imbued with a new, painful significance. The click of his suitcase latch, the rustle of clothes, the decisive snap of his phone being picked up from the nightstand. He was acting normal. Too normal. He was acting as if nothing had happened. As if he had not kissed me with a soul-shattering tenderness a few hours ago. As if he had not held me while I slept. He disappeared into the bathroom, and the sound of the shower started. I finally allowed myself to move, to breathe. I wrapped my arms around myself, a pathetic attempt to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The anxiety spiral tightened its grip, pulling me down into a dark vortex of overthinking. I analyzed every moment of the previous night, reframing it through the lens of this morning's cold distance. The confession of his fears, was that just a calculated move to create a false sense of intimacy? The first touch, a moment of weakness he now regretted? The kiss, a catastrophic misjudgment? My mind, my greatest asset in my ordered world of design, was now my torturer. It constructed elaborate scenarios of the future, the awkward elevator rides, the tense project meetings, the polite but icy emails. I had taken the beautiful, safe museum piece and I had shattered it. And the worst part was, it was my fault. I had kissed him back. I had let him hold me. I had leaned into the chaos, and now I was going to pay the price. When he came out of the bathroom, he was already dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and trousers. His hair was perfectly combed. He was the architect again. He did not look at me as he walked over to the desk, his phone already pressed to his ear. "Yes, Mark, I know," he was saying, his voice all business. "The keynote is still on for 2 o'clock. The blizzard set us back, but we're fine. No, everything's fine." That last part felt like a direct blow. Everything's fine. It was a lie, a carefully constructed piece of corporate speak designed to smooth over any disruption. And I was the disruption. I was the messy, emotional complication that needed to be smoothed over and forgotten. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a grief for something I never really had. For a few hours in the dark, I had allowed myself to hope. I had stepped outside the gallery, touched the art, and felt it come to life in my hands. Now, in the morning light, I could see it was just cold, lifeless stone after all. And my fingerprints were all over it, a messy smudge on its perfect surface. I just wanted to disappear, to rewind time, to be back in my quiet, lonely, but safe, grayscale world. The rest of the morning passed in a state of suspended, agonizing tension. We moved around the small room like two opposing magnets, repelling each other, careful never to get too close. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the ghost of the intimacy we had shared. I took my shower, dressed in silence, and packed my bag with meticulous, robotic precision. It was a desperate attempt to impose order on the utter chaos I was feeling inside. Julian remained on the phone, his back to me for most of the time, pacing by the window as he spoke in low, serious tones about structural integrity and zoning permits. He was completely immersed in his world, a world where I clearly had no place. Each professionally delivered sentence was another brick in the wall he was rebuilding between us. We were due to check out at 11. At 10:45, he finally ended his call. The click of the phone ending the connection echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. I braced myself. This was it. The moment for the polite, soul-crushing conversation. The about last night speech that would carefully and clinically excise the event from our shared history. He turned from the window, and for the first time that morning, he looked at me. Really looked at me. His expression was unreadable, his green eyes shadowed with something I could not decipher. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. "Leo," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of the professional confidence he had been using on the phone. "We need to talk about last night." There it was, the dreaded sentence. I felt my carefully constructed composure begin to crack. I gave a small, jerky nod, unable to speak. I prepared myself for the gentle letdown, the apology, the rationalization. I braced for the impact. He took a step towards me, then stopped. He ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture of weariness I had seen at the airport, but this time it seemed fraught with a deeper turmoil. "I handled this morning all wrong," he said, his gaze dropping to the floor. I panicked. "I'm sorry. I made things weird." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. This was not the speech I had been expecting. Apology was not on the script my anxiety had written. "I woke up," he continued, his voice a low, rough murmur. "And you were there, and it was real. And all I could think about was that I had crossed a line, that I had taken advantage of the situation, pressured you into something you didn't want. All I could think was that I had completely ruined everything." He looked up then, and his eyes were filled with a raw vulnerability that mirrored my own. The wall was gone. The confident architect was gone. It was just Julian, the man from the dark, the man who was afraid. "The truth is," he said, taking another hesitant step closer, "last night wasn't a mistake. Not for me. It was the only thing I've been thinking about for months." The room seemed to tilt. My brain was reeling, trying to catch up with this sudden, shocking reversal. "Months," I whispered, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "I'm not as subtle as I think I am, I guess. I notice things, Leo. I notice the way you focus on your work, The way you always have a sketchbook with you. I noticed you in the elevator a year ago, and I haven't been able to stop noticing you since." He paused, his expression turning serious. "This conference, it wasn't a coincidence. My boss was going to send someone else. I asked to come. I was hoping I might get a chance to actually talk to you. Outside of the office." Every word he spoke was systematically dismantling the narrative of regret and rejection I had spent the entire morning constructing. The blizzard, the shared cab, the overbooked hotel, it had all been a chaotic series of unfortunate events. But his intention, his hope, had been there all along. A single, persistent doubt remained, a final brick in my wall of insecurity. "But I saw you," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "At the coffee shop. With a woman." A look of confusion crossed his face, then cleared, replaced by a soft, weary amusement. "My sister," he said, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. "Anna. She's relentless. She's been trying to set me up on dates for years. She has terrible taste." He shook his head. "She just doesn't get it." The final brick crumbled. The wall was gone. All that was left was the raw, open space between us, filled with a terrifying, wonderful possibility. Relief washed over me in a dizzying, powerful wave. It was so potent it made me feel lightheaded. "I thought you were straight," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I thought this was all just a hopeless crush." "So did I," he said, and the admission was so quiet, so vulnerable, it stole the air from my lungs. "For a long time. You made me reconsider everything." He closed the remaining distance between us. He did not touch me, not yet. He just stood before me, his presence a warm, solid certainty. "Last night," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate rumble I had heard in the dark, "was the first honest thing I've done in a long time. Kissing you. It felt like I could finally breathe. And then, it was my turn." The fear was still there, a faint tremor in my hands, but it was overshadowed by a soaring, brilliant hope. "I've been watching you for over a year," I confessed, the secret finally released from its quiet prison. "I thought you were this perfect, unattainable person. Last night, when you talked about your father, about being afraid, that was when I saw you. The real you." A profound understanding passed between us in the quiet of that hotel room. The tension did not disappear, but it transformed. It was no longer the sharp, anxious tension of uncertainty, but the deep, humming thrum of mutual desire, of a connection finally acknowledged. He lifted his hands and framed my face, just as he had done in the dark. His touch was warm and sure. "Leo," he murmured, his name a prayer on his lips. And he kissed me. This kiss was nothing like the first. There was no hesitation, no questioning. It was deep and sure, a release of all the pent-up tension, all the fear, all the yearning. It was a kiss of profound relief, of recognition, of coming home to a place I had never known existed. My hands came up to grip his arms, anchoring myself to him as the last vestiges of my old, ordered world washed away. In their place was something new, something chaotic and uncertain, but something infinitely more real. It was the start of a new design, a new life, and its lines were anything but straight. The conference passed in a surreal, dreamlike haze. We were two people living a double life. In the crowded convention halls and during keynote speeches, we were the consummate professionals. Leo the designer, Julian the architect. We maintained a careful distance, exchanging polite nods and brief, businesslike comments. But in the spaces between, in the stolen moments, we were something else entirely. A shared smile across a crowded room that held a universe of secret meaning. The brief, electric brush of his fingers against mine as we passed in a hallway. A text message that simply said, "You look good up there," while I was watching him command the stage during his keynote, my heart swelling with a pride that felt deeply, dangerously personal. The flight home was a quiet revelation. We sat next to each other, the armrest between us a flimsy, irrelevant barrier. We did not talk much. We did not need to. He put on his headphones, and I opened my sketchbook, but our proximity was a conversation in itself. At one point, he fell asleep, his head slumping onto my shoulder. I sat perfectly still, my entire being focused on the warm, solid weight of him against me, the soft sound of his breathing. I did not move for the entire hour, my arm falling asleep, a small price to pay for this quiet, perfect moment of intimacy. This was real. This was happening. Our first real date was a few days later. It was not a grand affair. He took me to a small, quiet Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street I had never noticed before. The light was low, the air smelled of garlic and old wine, and for the first time, we just talked. We moved beyond the confessions of the hotel room into the real substance of our lives. I learned that his confident exterior was a carefully constructed armor against a deep-seated fear of mediocrity. He learned that my quietness was not aloofness, but a shield against a world that often felt too loud, too overwhelming. He told me about his passion for woodworking, how he loved the smell of sawdust, and the certainty of shaping something real and tangible with his hands. I told him about my love for old black and white films, for the way they could tell epic stories with just light and shadow. We were unwrapping the layers of each other, the carefully curated public personas, and discovering the real, flawed, and infinitely more interesting people underneath. As we left the restaurant, a light rain began to fall. He hailed a cab, and as he held the door for me, his hand rested for a moment on the small of my back. The touch was simple, protective, and proprietary. It was a public declaration, however small, and it sent a thrill of warmth through me that had nothing to do with the stuffy heat of the cab. The following weeks were a montage of quiet firsts. The first time he came over to my apartment, his large frame seeming to fill my small, minimalist space, making it feel less like a gallery and more like a home. He ran his hand over my collection of art books, his touch gentle and appreciative. The first time I saw his apartment, which was warmer and more lived in than I had expected, with shelves he had built himself filled with books on history and philosophy, not just architecture. The first time we cooked dinner together, a clumsy, laughing affair that ended with too much pasta and a kitchen dusted in flour. These were the small, quiet moments of care that were building the foundation of something new. It was in the way he started bringing me a coffee in the mornings, remembering exactly how I took it. It was in the way I started leaving a light on for him when I knew he was working late. We were learning each other's rhythms, creating a new, shared pattern that was infinitely more satisfying than the solitary one I had known before. One evening, about a month after the conference, my phone buzzed with a text from him. I was working late, staring at a difficult design, and the message made me smile, a real, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. It read, "My thermostat is broken. It's freezing in my apartment. Any chance you have a spare room with one king-sized bed?" I typed back my reply, my fingers moving quickly. "Only if you're okay with sharing. I hear the city is completely booked solid." His response came a second later. A single word. "Perfect." Later that night, he was beside me in my bed, the familiar warmth of his body a comforting presence in the dark. The awkwardness of that first night in Chicago was a distant memory, replaced by an easy, comfortable intimacy. He was tracing patterns on my arm with his finger, and I was listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. I thought back to my old life, to the man I was just a few weeks ago. The man who lived in a museum of his own making, who observed life from behind a velvet rope. The walls I had built to protect myself, to keep out the pain of rejection and the chaos of emotion, had also served another purpose. They had kept out joy. They had kept out connection. They had kept out love. Letting Julian in had been the most terrifying thing I had ever done. It was an act of demolishing my own defenses, of willingly stepping into the unpredictable, messy, and beautiful chaos of another person's life. It required a vulnerability I never thought I possessed. But as I lay there in the quiet of my apartment, with his arm wrapped around me and his steady breathing a gentle rhythm in the night, I knew a different kind of order. It was not the sterile, rigid order of straight lines and solitude. It was the warm, living, breathing order of a shared life. It was the profound peace that comes not from being alone, but from being known. And it was better than anything I had ever been able to design on my own. It was a masterpiece, and it was ours.